My name is Josona Trujillo, and I'm presenting Conspiracy or Coincidence. The founding fathers of the American deep state and JFK assassination. So think about it. You have a murder that took place almost 70 years ago, yet people are still being killed now. Why? Could it be because the people who killed JFK are still in power today? Not the same people, but the same organizations? Today, America versus the deep state. The government you elect and the unelected deep state. There are two main groups behind the assassination. You will learn today something that has never been publicly announced before today. The large bankers were against Kennedy not because of any sort of executive order he signed, but because JFK was slowly learning about many different deep secrets of the deep state. They were worried about JFK being so popular with the people that he would tell or share these secrets with the public. If this happened, the power of these that these groups enjoyed over the people would immediately dissipate. The connection that has not been put together before. The Federal Reserve of big bankers has been put together as a Ponzi scheme to bankrupt the US. Big oil has been put together as a fraud based on a limited supply of gas and oil instead of an unlimited one. These two frauds have created the military industrial complex, endless war, organized crime, climate change, global warming, all based on nothing more than control of people and making them more money. Ever wondered about this? Why opposites are working with each other? ISIS and the US, organized crime and the FBI, CIA and drug dealers, contract killers and the CIA, police, FBI, CIA, mob, and cover-ups. Never mind the differences they are all tools of the deep state. They were all created to control people and could not exist without their counterpart. To prove my point, just ask one question. Ever since G.H.W. Bush declared war on drugs, has the problem increased or decreased? This proves most of what is told us is a fraud or a lie. The deep state is so good that they get the public to do their bidding. The deep state is funded on a fraud. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 would not have passed unless a few people died. This Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President Woodrow Wilson signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill. The financial system has been turned over to the Federal Reserve Board. The board of administers the finance system by authority of a purely profiteering group. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created, like two common working on work. The Fed made credit easy while establishment newspapers hype what riches could be made in the stock market. Look at what they did on April 15, 1912. Today, these men would be worth $11 billion. All three of these men were aboard the Titanic when it sank. All three died that night. Did you know the sinking of the Titanic led to the creation of the US Federal Reserve? Now, some will dismiss this completely. But before you do, please look at how the Federal Reserve got started and why. The Federal Reserve actually begins in November 1910. 6 men have a secret meeting to begin the Federal Reserve. On November 19, 6 men, Nelson Aldrich, Pia Andrew, Henry Davidson, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg, met at the Jekyll Island Club off the coast of Georgia to write a plan to reform the nation's banking system. The meeting and its purpose were closely guarded secrets, and the participants did not admit that the meeting occurred until the 1930s. But the plan written on Jekyll Island laid a foundation for what would eventually be the Federal Reserve System. The American banking system before 1913. Like many Americans, these men were concerned with financial panics, which had disrupted economic activity in the United States periodically. During the 19th century, nationwide panics occurred on average every 15 years. These panics forced financial institutions to suspend operations, triggering long and deep recessions. American banks held required reserves of cash, but these reserves were scattered throughout the nation, held in vaults of thousands of banks or as deposits in financial institutions. Designated reserve and central reserve cities during crisis, they became frozen in place, preventing them from being used to alleviate the situation during booms. Banks' excess reserves tended to flow toward big cities, especially New York, where bankers invested them in call loans, which were loans repayable on demand to brokers. The brokers in turn loaned the funds to investors speculating in equity markets, whose stock purchases served as a collateral for the transactions. This American system made bank reserves immobile and equity markets volatile, a recipe for financial instability. The result of this meeting. By the end of their time on Jekyll Island, Aldrich and his colleagues had developed a plan for a reserve Association of America, a single central bank with 15 branches across the country. Each branch would be governed by boards of directors elected by the members banks in each district, with larger banks getting more votes. The branches would be responsible for holding the reserves of their member banks, issuing currency, discounting commercial paper, transferring balances between branches, and check clearing and collection. The national body would set discount rates for the system as a whole and buy and sell securities. Shortly after returning home, Aldrich became ill and was unable to write the group's final report. So Vanderlip and Strong traveled to Washington to get the plan ready for Congress. Aldrich presented it to National Monetary Commission in January 1911 without telling the commission members how the plan had been developed. The final report, along with the legislative text, went to Congress a year later with a few minor changes, including naming the institution the National Reserve Association. Scientific in its method and democratic in its control. The banks couldn't control the US under the old system. They created a flat currency in which they can control the US money supply and ensure their wealth. The flat money is the key here because fiat money is the key here because fiat money is created by the banks. Fiat currency, a human invention, and we all know humans ain't perfect. What is fiat money? Is it worth anything? Your debt is fake, your money is fake. The reality of how money is created today differs from the description found in some economics textbooks. Rather than banks receiving deposits when households save and then lending out, banks lending creates deposits. The Bank of England press release. Money creation in the US. Whatever bonds the other banks do not purchase, the Federal Reserve purchases. The Federal Reserve can exercise a power that the Treasury cannot. It can simply print the money from nothing, but it creates this money as a public debt. The government's liability to the Fed. This is exactly scenario number 3 in the previous slide. What is fiat money? Fiat money is the currency which derives its value from government regulation or law. It differs from commodity money, which is based on a good, often, or precious metal such as gold or silver, which has uses other than as a medium of exchange. Money creation in the U.S. The U.S., the Federal Reserve prints Federal Reserve notes, which function as legal tender or fiat money. This money essentially represents debt to the Fed. U.S. coins, however, are produced by the U.S. Treasury and do not represent debt to private banks. This is money. This is debt. What is in your wallet? The origins of the Federal Reserve, economic stability concerns. The gold standard as an alternative to a central bank. In a gold standard, the value of currency is fixed in terms of the quantity of gold. The gold standard sets the price, money supply, and price level, generally with limited central bank intervention. Purchasing power of the US dollar. Before 1913, we had little or no national debt. This is the total US debt of GDP. In 1964, the minimum wage was 5 silver quarters, and now in 2016, 5 silver quarters have a mill value of $15.55. We don't need to raise the minimum wage. We need to fix the money. What is fiat money? It's legalized government money. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly or and unobserved an important part of the wealth of a citizen. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. John Maynard Keynes, father of the Keynesian economics. What do other people say about the Federal Reserve? Woodrow Wilson said, a great industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and the duress of small groups of dominant men. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive people of all their poverty until children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Said by Thomas Jefferson, 1802. The gold standard did not collapse. Governments abolished it in order to pave the way for inflation. Solomon pledges were broken. Retroactive laws were promulgated provisions of constitutions and bills. Our rights were openly defied. And holds a servile writer praised what the governments had done and held at the dawn of the flat money millennium. Ludwig von Mises. War, who is it good for? The deep state uses its funds to make more money. Funds from oil, funds from banks, goes to funding the military industrial complex, which in turn funds more money for the deep state. Congressman Louis T. McFadden said, Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The Federal Reserve Board, a government board, has cheated the government of the United States and the people of the United States out of the money to pay the national debt. Mr. Chairman, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of the United States did not perceive that a world system was being set up here, and that this country was to supply financial power to an international superstate, a superstate controlled by international bankers and international industrialists, acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. The bankers lied because the truth is so simple. The bankers lied about the nature of the Federal Reserve. America was established not to create wealth, but to realize a vision, to realize an ideal, to discover and maintain liberty among men, or wasn't. These two knows it. Is your belief that one has more value than another? So how many will have to die so we can force our little Ponzi scheme on the rest of the world? A couple 100 million. Not bad at all. The Federal Reserve Board, 1917. Regarding the central bank's debt-based fiat money scam, the few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. They killed to establish the Federal Reserve Bank. They lied to keep it going. Why wouldn't they kill to keep it safe? Now the deep state takes back what they believe belongs to them. Ever wonder why large oil companies are not worried about running out of oil? The answer is easy. They know better. They are not running out and never will. How the deep state got deep pockets. Monopoly is also based on a fraud as well. We are taught this garbage in school. How oil is actually made, no dinosaurs needed. The deep state wanted us to believe we are running out of oil. Not there yet. Notable past predictions of peak oil that didn't turn out. U.S. oil production will likely peak between 1965 and 1970 and decline steadily thereafter. But how do you run out of a natural occurring substance? How will top oil producers perform in 2017? Remember, according to peak oil, we would be out by now, not leading the world in production. Wake up, America. The origins of oil. Instead of less oil, we have more. The state geologist of Pennsylvania warns that the amazing exhibition of oil is only a temporary and vanishing phenomenon. And John Argood and John D. Rockefeller's partner in Standard Oil sells some companies shares at a discount, fearing that oil will run out. Weekly use crude oil production. Instead of producing less oil, we have produced more oil than ever before. Oil is naturally occurring. We do not have to import it. Now, all of those wars fought over oil. No blood for oil. They bring you little. They bring you little to help you or your family. Endless war. Depletion used to indicate the decrease in the value of resource based when natural resources are being consumed when producing products or services. Term mostly commonly used in connection with mining properties, oil and gas wells, timberlands, etc. Amounts charged as depletion cannot be used to replace sold resources. Oil depletion allowance. Kennedy was still proposing tax reforms legislation bills to close tax loopholes. Those were their loopholes Kennedy was talking about. And particularly, there was the oil depletion allowance. Although the Kennedy plan ostensibly kept the rate of allowance at a 27.5%, attorneys, the Oilman's attorneys analyzing the measure had concluded that changes proposed by the administration and tax code would cut the effective rate to 17.5%. To the rest of the world, such a reduction would only justice, or at least the beginning of justice. To Oilman, it was robbery. The hundreds of hidden tax breaks for oil in the Internal Revenue Code would cost them millions and perhaps billions of dollars a year. The governments seek oil. How the deep state runs the country through education, medicine, banks. They control the government by controlling you. I always try to turn every disaster into an opportunity. How could it be telling us the truth? The Titanic disaster, World War I, the stock market, Pearl Harbor, JFK assassination, Vietnam War, Watergate, Iran Contra, Clinton, and 9/11. The FDR letter to the King of Saudi Arabia, April 5th, 1945. That letter suggests a no-go for U.S. to recognize Israel as a state. However, the bankers wanted Israel to become a state and the U.S. would help recognize it. 1 week later, the FDR is dead. Coincidence? We'll put it this way. If you kill a dying man, few questions are asked. 20 years later, it happens again. FDR murdered, headlines hint, sudden death, health problems hid from the public, easy to kill dying man, JFK murdered by a plot. Handbills passed out in Dallas, November 21, 1963. Handbills passed out in Dallas, November 21st, 1963. two ways to compute depletion allowance: the method, based on percentage of year gross income, provided amount charged does not exceed 50% of the net income. Before deduction or depletion allowance can be used for most types of metal mines, geothermal deposits, and coal mines. Cannot be used for timber, and then in most cases is not applicable to oil and gas. When method applies, depletion allowance must be calculated by cost and percentage method. The larger of the two applies. Oil depletion allowance system. In 1916, the petroleum industry takes off as Americans' love affair with the automobile begins. A new tax provisions allows oil companies to write off dry holes as well as intangible drilling costs, the first year of exploration. Over the next 15 years, oil and gas subsides will average 1.9 billion a year in today's dollars. Congress approves the depletion allowance, which let oil producers deduct more than a quarter of their gross revenues. Texas and Tom Connolly, who sponsored the break, later admits we would have taken a 5 or 10% figure, but we grabbed a 25.5%, 27.5% because we're not only hogs, but the odd figure made it appear as though it was scientifically arrived at. 1937, the Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau calls the depletion allowance perhaps the most glaring loophole in the tax code. President Franklin D. Roosevelt urges Congress to close it, and other tax evasions methods so widespread and so amazing, both in the boldness and ingenuity, with that further action without delay seems imperative. Natural gas killers in Kansas first experiment with hydraulic fracturing or fracking, but the technology won't be widely used until the federal government backs its development in the 1970s. President Harry S. Truman unsuccessfully prods Congress to end the depletion allowance. 1957, asked about the depletion allowance, President Dwight Eisenhower replies, "I am not prepared to say it is evil because while we do fine, I assume that a number of rich men take advantage of it unfairly. There must be certainly by an incentive in this country if we are going to continue the exploration of gas and oil that is so important to our economy." 1960, presidential candidates John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon debate the depletion allowance. Kennedy says he's willing to do a review and close the loophole. Nixon counters, "I favor the president depletion allowance. I favor it not because I want to make a lot of oil men rich, but because I want to make America rich." Congress cuts the depletion allowance deduction from 27.5 to 23% over the objections of the president of the Gulf War, who calls it a cornerstone of a major part of the foundation on which the industry was built its house. To dismantle it in whole or in part could very well jeopardize the whole structure, and to a serious degree. The economy depended on it. President Nixon says that tax break is the national interest because Mideast oil supplies could be cut off in the event of a war conflict. Oil depletion allowance goes with the OPEC oil embargo and energy crisis at full tilt. Nixon vows to do everything in power to prevent the big oil companies and major energy producers from being unconscionable profit out of this crisis. President Gerald Ford authorized the creation of Energy Research and Development Administration to oversee energy R&D. For the next 5 years, federal spending on fossil fuel research jumps tenfold to 1.4 billion. Ford almost vetoes, but then signs a tax bill that repeals the depletion allowance for large companies. It remains in place for smaller and independent drillers. 1975 to 1977, the Department of Energy oversees the first successful applicants of large-scale fracking to extract oil and gas. President Jimmy Carter praises Samuel Russell of oil-rich Louisiana for voting to do away with the oil depletion allowance, which was a very courageous thing to do. As oil prices rise, oil depletion allowance not need to make windfall profits. Education. Why Rockefeller got involved in education. In the early 20th century, J.D. Rockefeller Education Foundation got involved in giving large grants. They spent millions of dollars money, which was used to radically bend the traditionalist education system toward a new system that favored standardized testing over critical thinking toward scientific management in schools. This was a part of a calculated plan to make the schooling system benefit corporate America at the expense of the American school child. What was this for? I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers, said John D. Rockefeller. It was found out in a congressional investigation. The only way to maintain control of the population was to obtain control of the education in the US. They realized this was a prodigious task, so the Carnegie Foundation approached the Rockefeller Foundation, which with the suggestion that they go in tandem and that the portion of education which could be considered as domestically oriented be taken over by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which was oriented to international matters be taken over by the Carnegie Endowment. GEB influences the school agenda. The General Education Board was established in 1903 by John D. Rockefeller. Its broad charter to sponsor and support aid to education in the United States without distinction of race, sex, or creed. The influential figure in the creation and scope of GEB was Frederick T. Gates, longtime philanthropic advisor to John D. Rockefeller. Although the former charter and mandate were broad at the one time, another included assistance to educational programs in each and every state. The initial emphasis of GEB was to work to improve education in the South. The new schools were not for critical thinking. The General Education Board was not interested in encouraging critical thinking. Rather, its focus was on organizing and creating reliable, predictable, obedient citizens. As award-winning former teacher John Goddard puts it, school was looked upon from the first of the 20th century as a branch of industry and tool of governance. The Rockefellers, along with the financial elite and the philanthropic organizations such as Gates, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and have been able to mold society by funding and pushing compulsory state schooling for the masses. Frederick T. Gates, Director of Charity for the Rockefeller Foundation. This is what he states. Good leadership consists of showing average people how to do the work of superior people, not medicine. Turning black gold into medicine, petroleum drugs. Let's go back in time to the late 1800s. John D. Rockefeller, a man quoted to have said, competition is sin, is the head of Rockefeller family and has just become very rich through extracting oil from the ground. And now he is looking for ways to capitalize even further with his oil. And when he comes across the idea of using coal tar, petroleum derivative to make substances that affect the human mind, body, and nervous system. These are called drugs, and they are excellent at masking or stopping symptoms, but overall do not cure the underlying cause of the disease. Buying out IG Farben. Rockefeller used his oil money to buy out a part of massive German pharmaceutical cartel IG Farben. This was the very same cartel that would later assist Hitler to implement his based vision of the New World Order founded on a racial supremacy by manufacturing chemicals and poisons for war. With the control of drug manufacturing under his wings, Rockefeller then embarked a decidedly wicked plan, wicked from the point of view of a free, healthy humanity, but brilliant from a business perspective. Destroying competition, just like oil. Rockefeller saw that there were many types of doctors and healing modulators in existence at that time, for chiropractic to naturopathy to homeopathy to holistic medicine to herbal medicine and more. He wanted to eliminate the competitors of Western medicine. The only modality which would propose drugs and radiation as treatment, thus enriching Rockefeller, who owned the means to produce these treatments. So he hired a man called Abraham Flexner to submit a report to Congress in 1910. This report concluded that there were too many doctors and medical schools in America, and that all the natural healing modalities which had existed for hundreds of or thousands of years were unscientific quackery. It called for the standardization of medical education, whereby only the allopathic-based AMA be allowed to grant medical school license in the U.S. Rockefeller played a hardball with people's lives. Medical schools that offered courses in bioelectric medicine, homeopathy, or Eastern medicine, for example, were told to either drop these courses from the curriculum or lose their accreditation, and underwriting support. A few schools resisted for a time, but eventually most schools cooperated or were closed down. Uh, Timeline for Rockefeller medical control. 1911, May 15, the Supreme Court of the U.S. finds John Rockefeller and his trust guilty of corruption, illegal business practices, and racketeering. As a result of his decision, the entire Rockefeller Standard Oil Trust, the world's largest corporation of its time, was sentenced to be dismantled, but the Rockefeller was already above the Supreme Court and did not care about the decisions. How philanthropy became monopoly, same game. In order to disperse public and political pressure on them and other robber barons, Rockefeller used a trade called philanthropy, whereby the legal gains from his robber practices in the oil business are used to launch the Rockefeller Foundation. This tax haven was used to strategically take over the healthcare sector in the United States. The Rockefeller Foundation was the front organizations for new global business ventures of Rockefeller and his accomplices. This new venture was called the pharmaceutical investment business. Donations from the Rockefeller Foundation went only to medical schools and hospitals. These institutions had become missionaries for a new breed of company. The manufacturers painted synthetic drugs. This was also the time when the first vitamins were discovered. It soon became clear, however, that these natural molecules had life-saving health benefits and that they were able to prevent many chronic health conditions. The first book appeared with research subsequently abandoned, and about the health benefit of vitamins, these newly discovered molecules had only one disadvantage: they were non-patentable. The Rockefeller medicine. Remember this: you're staying sick. Big pharma profits over people and examples. The truth about the drug companies, every aspect of your life. The Standard Oil. How big oil conquered the world. A German antitrust act made it illegal to form the trust that interfered with free trade between states or with other countries. In 1890, Ohio Attorney General David K. Watson took on Standard Oil for being a monopoly. However, what if the splits never really took place? Rockefeller and his associates did not build the Standard Oil in the broad rooms of Wall Street banks. They fought their way back to control by rebate and drawback, bribe and blackmail, espionage and price cutting by ruthless efficiency of organization. Tarbell portrayed John D. Rockefeller as a bad-tempered, stingy, money-grabbing, and viciously effective at monopolizing the oil trade and destroying small businesses. The history of the Standard Oil Company. The Supreme Court orders the dissolution of Standard Oil Company, declaring a monopoly and restraint of trade. Standard Oil and illegal trust and must be dissolved. Standard Oil was established by John D. Rockefeller. He approached mergers differently. They joined with competing companies and trust agreements. Participants in a trust turned their stock over to a group of trustees, people who ran the separate companies as one corporation. In return, the companies were entitled to the dividends and profits earned by the trust. Trusts were not legal mergers. Rockefeller used a trust to gain total control of the oil industry in the US. Rush strategies enabled big businesses to eliminate competition. Big businesses formed partnerships to create monopolies. They merged small companies into large corporations. They aimed for total control of an industry so that they could fix prices and wages to their advantage. Next, to doing the right thing. The most important thing is to let people know that you are doing the right thing. John D. Rockefeller. Let's see if Rockefeller did exactly that. He told the public oil was a fossil fuel when he owned 90% of the oil. This made the product scarce and increased its profit. He told the public the natural medicine was bad, you should use modern medicine. Modern medicine was guided by his oil, his financial wealth, and he made money off booze. This is important because he told us that we should all go to public education. He told us that the classes we should take. He told us that we should have standardized tests, teach to the middle, and make everyone smart enough to become good workers and not question society. Under the Federal Reserve Act, panics are scientifically created. The present panic is the first scientifically created one, worked out as well as we figure a mathematical equation, said by Charles Lindbergh. The act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust organizations will be legalized. The money power oversaws the legislative and executive forces of the nation and of the states. I have seen these forces exerted during the stages of this bill. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. It may not do so immediately, but the trusts want a period of inflation because all the stocks they have gone down. Now, if the trust can get another period of inflation, they figure they can unload the stocks on the people at high prices during excitement and then bring on panic, put them back at low prices. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. No matter how paranoid or conspiracy minded you are, what the government is doing is worse than you imagine. Woodrow Wilson states, I am a most unhappy man. Have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We're no longer governed by free opinion, no longer governed by conviction and the vote of majority, but a government by the opinion of jurisdictions of a small group of dominant men. 1913, worst year ever. How do you have endless wars, gasoline shortages when there's limited education, when there is none to be had, medicine that cause you to become addicted, not cured? It was carefully planned and heavily orchestrated by the deep state. Now apply this to the Kennedy assassination. Was big oil involved? Parada 2007. Many experts on America believe that the conspiracy in Dallas was organized by a group of billionaires from Texas with Harnold Hunt to the head. The man was considered considered the world's richest man of that time. The Texas businessman took an active part in political life of America. He nominated Texas Senator Lyndon Johnson for the presidential election in 1960. The first attempt to promote Johnson was a failure, but Hunt finished the game in Dallas as a result of Kennedy was killed and his candidate came to the White House. Who is H.O. Hunt? This is more from H.O. Hunt. Decide what you want, decide what you are willing to exchange for, establish your priorities, and go to work. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy. Putting the pieces together. An oilman drills a well that costs $100,000, finds a reservoir containing $10 million worth of oil, then the well produces $1 million worth of oil per year for 10 years. In the very first year, thanks to the depletion allowance, the oilman can conduct 27.5% or 275,000 of that 1 million in income from his taxable income. Thus, in just 1 year, he's deducted nearly 3 times of his initial investment, but the depletion allowance continues to pay off. For each of the next 9 years, he gets to continue taking 275,000 depletion deduction. By the end of the 10th year, the oilman has deducted 2.75 million from his taxable income, even though his initial investment was only 100,000. Such a system was clearly unfair and only benefited a small group of businessmen in Texas. It seemed only a matter of time before Congress removed this tax loophole. However, this oilman used some of their great wealth to manipulate the politicians in Washington, especially LBJ. Now add to the fact that oil can be used basically tax-free, never runs out, and Americans are duped and paying through the nose for it. The oilman would have a great deal to lose. The bank's industrial complex, big oil are one. In September 2000, on September of 2003, George W. Bush asked the U.S. Congress to approve an $87 billion spending package to pay for the war for the reconstruction efforts in Iraq. Not surprisingly, a big chunk of that money was going to Dick Cheney's old company, Halliburton. When Bush went to Congress, Halliburton had already been paid about $2 billion for its work in Iraq. The company had 4,500 on its payroll. Though it was hard to tell the Halliburton employees from the U.S. military, some were working at oil installations like Mina al-Bakr, others were delivering mail to U.S. troops, others were cooking meals, doing laundry, building military bases. Like the soldiers, Halliburton employees were dying. By January 2004, more than a dozen Halliburton workers or subcontractors have been killed while carrying out their duties in Iraq. For his part, Dick Cheney went on television in September of 2003 to defend his ongoing payments from Halliburton. Cheney insisted that he had no financial interest in Halliburton of any kind. This was incorrect. When Cheney made that statement, he still had options on about 433,000 shares of Halliburton stock. He was also in the second year of a 5-year deferred compensation deal with Halliburton. In 2002, Cheney received deferred compensation payments from Halliburton that totaled to 162,392. That sum was on top of 205,000 to $298 deferred compensation that Cheney received in 2001. As Vice President, Cheney annual salary is 198,600. Cheney also defended his older employer, saying he had no idea why Halliburton got the oil field repair contract, but he did say that there are a few companies out there that have the combination of the very large engineering construction capability and significant oil field services. In other words, after decades of getting closer and closer to the U.S. government, the U.S. military, Halliburton became the Pentagon's only choice. It could feed troops, build camps, fix pipelines, repair oil wells, and do everything else America's army of occupation needed. In Iraq, Halliburton became an example of one of what economist James Kenneth Galbraith has called the military petroleum complex. Of course, the politicians do the bidding of the deep state. Bush Sr. was a little peeved, not at his allies in the oil and chemical industry, of course. The National Petrochemical and Refiners Association, a group of whose members includes virtually all U.S. refiners and petrochemical manufacturers, was a friendly audience. He was angry at those misguided protesters who were staging huge anti-war rallies all over the country. Those demonstrators have gotten under Bush's skins. He was particularly inflamed by the signs that the demonstrators were carrying that said "No war for oil." Bush said, Bush said that he seen similar protests and similar signs prior to the first Iraq War, and now that second Iraq War was underway. He was still contending that the protesters were mistaken. This is not oil, he told. This is not about oil, he told the refiners. You want to know who killed Kennedy? Asked who has the power to reroute the presidential motorcade, ignore standard operating procedures, and cover it up. On 9/11, who had the power to turn on the air defense? I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scattered it into the winds. Sniper kills Kennedy. The plot to scapegoat Russia. The deep state. This is a quote from a Nazi German general officer, another quote from the Soviet Union, and an anonymous quote from the United States. John F. Kennedy and Muammar Gaddafi were both killed by the deep state. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so persuasive that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak the condemnation of it. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th U.S. president. Eisenhower's farewell seized threat to liberties and vast defense machine. My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, said by John F. Kennedy. These words in his inauguration killed him. The deep state want people dependent. The deep state wants groups dependent. The deep state wants poor schools. The deep state wants bad medicine. The deep state wants endless wars. The deep state doesn't want you to know because because you are a danger to their society. What made President Kennedy great was his attacks on the deep state. What caused President JFK was also the same Government versus deep state. The Warren Commission. CIA George Bush Dealey Plaza Coordinator. Organizational chart for the deep state. The deep state elite, those in red matter at JFK, bankers, mega wealth, big business, big oil, big pharma, big military industrial complex, NSA, CIA, FBI, political leaders, labor leaders, mafia, organized crime, political bosses, government employees, educational leaders. JFK killed by the deep state. What is the deep state? It's something that controls our lives. The end.